The fall leaves crackled between my boots. We were making our way to the tree stand, situated roughly a kilometer northwest, in the forest behind the hunting camp. We definitely should have been there by now. Frank, you moron! We must have made a wrong turn. Fuck off, Brandon! I know my way around this place like the back of my hand. I was the one who grew up here. I take out my compass and show him it was almost perfectly facing northeast. Well, what the fuck? We walked straight out. How did we end up facing this way? I don't know. Do you see that? Give me the binoculars. We stared off into the distance behind a bush. He didn't give me them. We were nearing the end of the forest, but this was still part of Frank's private property in northern Ontario. How in the world did this group of people get here? And for how long? Frank got to take the first close-up look. They look like those hunter-gatherers from the history class. That's not possible. How would they have even gotten back here? Doesn't a river block the entry to the forest from the back? They're hunter-gatherers, you imbecile. I think they could maneuver a river. Why haven't you seen them before then? How do you not notice 10 people living on your property? I don't know. I have a life. I'm only here for a couple of weeks at most throughout the year. And we always hunt and trap the northwest side. Should we tell them to get off your land? I don't know. He hands me the binoculars. I scouted out the tiny civilization. They really did look like Frank's description. These people were living off the land. No sign of modern technology or even traditional camping equipment. It was all handmade. That's when I noticed her. She made direct eye contact with me, like she was staring directly into the lenses. Even from here, I could tell she had the greenest eyes I had ever seen. Had she heard us? No, it would have been impossible. Not only the fact that we are far enough away to need binoculars, but I also pride myself on my camouflage skills. But even still, I began whispering. Bro, she looked at me. Now she's coming towards us. Oh shit, she's pointing at us. I'm not dealing with this weird shit. I'm out. Before I could say another word, he was gone. What am I supposed to do? I'm no murderer, but given their homemade clothing, tree-made huts, and an array of weapons, they seem resourceful enough to utilize all my bones, flesh, and organs. Who are these people? I waited there in the bush, embarrassed to admit, but my eyes were tightly closed shut, gripping my bow close to my chest, in case I would have to use it. When she came closer, until she was standing right in front of me. But it sounded as if she was alone, and that she had sat down. God, quit being such a pussy, Brandon. Open your eyes. With that bout of counter-confidence, I was ready to face the music. She was absolutely stunning, even with that stupid grin on her face, and the cockeyed glance she gave me. Hi. I didn't mean to frighten you. I'm Veronica. As she extended her hand. Shouldn't your name be organic? Like, I don't know, Pocahontas? Funny. No, I'm not part of a lost tribe or something. We just go on group travels in the late spring to early fall. We are actually packing up now. It's the beginning of hunting season, and we know there is a camp up there. What the fuck is she going on about? Like that is normal or something? What? I had to ask. We are spiritualists of sorts. We like to survive off the land. But it's not sustainable yet. This is only our second year, and plus, we are trespassing. We go back to the modern world for half a year, and hopefully we will save up enough to buy land of our own, and not have to worry about ever returning. Why were you pointing at us? I was just showing the others where I was going. I didn't tell them I sensed you, but I could. You smell of stale cigarette. I could smell you a mile away. Could I have one? We talked for some time. She explained they were a Wiccan group from the same city I lived. It was all very intriguing, and what a beautiful specimen. She had long black hair, tan skin, slender frame but carried some muscle, and those memorizing eyes. I couldn't keep my dull hazel eyes off of her. I was always picked on for my height. Puberty decided to grant me a wish, and I went from a runt to a 5'7" man who couldn't shake the six-pack even if I tried. I was short still, but muscular, enough to keep me fit without trying. I'm not hard to look at is basically my point. After we parted ways, I realized I hadn't spoken an hour beyond short replies and generic questions about Wiccan, which she gladly accepted as a sign to ramble on some more. But I didn't mind. I was sure she'd never call me when I gave her my number, for when she gets back to the real world. I thought she was being polite when she took it. To my surprise, she did call 2 weeks later, and we hit it off. Everything was going great. I wasn't sold on the living in the forest idea, but I considered myself an outdoorsman. So when the property beside Frank's hunting camp went up for sale 2 years after we met, I jumped on it. I proposed to Veronica, and we left the city to live in our quaint little home surrounded by the forest. She was in love, and so was I. We married that summer. Then, as most things go, something had to go wrong to break the bliss of the honeymoon stage. In this case, while searching for the cause of my abdominal pain in the mirror, I found a lump on my junk. The doctor said it wasn't as simple as removing a ball. He would have to remove the lymph glands in my abdomen. The bells in my head were going off when he explained I most likely will become sterile after the surgery. The appointment was set for the end of August 2014. Everything went well. I was cancer-free, but I became depressed that I'd never be a father. Veronica had the answer, though. We talked all night, almost exact as the day we first met. She talked at length of Wiccan, and I nodded in agreement. Only difference was, I was a bit more buzzed this time, and also I was recovering from surgery in my hospital bed. Her solution was simple. On the next full moon, October 8th, we would perform a spell. We will invoke Cernunnos, the Celtic deity of fertility, so that I could be a father. Before I returned home from the hospital, she had collected all the things needed: sea salt, green candles, one being larger than the rest, elderberries gathered from the forest, sweet grass from the river from the edge of our property, and for my contribution, a tall bottle of my best batch of home-brewed beer. She says it has to come from the heart. She knows me so well. I was still a bit weak when I was discharged, but being back at home helped. Instead of staring at the 4 sterile walls of the hospital that felt like they were closing in on me, I could finally breathe again. That evening, we set off into the forest to set up before it got dark. She cast the circle with sea salt, placing 5 candles to signify the points of the star. And while the sun was setting, she instructed me what to do and say, and that I am to do this on my own. I memorized the verses. The weight of the words made me feel as though it is my connection to becoming a father. I got in the center, and she lit the candles around me. I lit my green candle and sat, focusing my mind and listening to the nature, and cleared my thoughts. She told me to recite the verses upon the full moon for the horned god. Wait, the horned god? That's who I'm contacting? My mind fogged as I imagined a man standing in the forest with antlers. With that thought, she told me it was time. O horned one, lord of the dance, god of hunt, god of grain, I sit in the cradle of your fertility, and I ask you to grant me the same. I sat for a while and couldn't keep the thought of a man with antlers out of my mind. But I focused as much as I could of being able to conceive. I offered the gatherings Veronica collected from the forest and river by a large oak tree and poured out the beer. Seemed appropriate to get out my knife to etch a crude heart with B plus V. Hey, I can be romantic. And with that, it was done. Time for the fun part. We decided to sleep out in the woods that night. I yearned for her body and was thrilled to enter it again. Maybe a little too thrilled. I didn't last very long after her moan indicating she had achieved orgasm. What a beautiful sound she makes, followed by her grin. We woke up with our limbs entangled, cuddling under a tree. She indicated she felt a little strange, but thinks it was a success. With that, we gathered our things and headed back home. The Saturday after the experience, I was sitting in the kitchen drinking a coffee, reading an article on hunting. Veronica came jumping out of the bathroom, waving a pea stick in the air. She was right, it had worked. We hugged and yelled in excitement. We were about to become parents. Given her spirituality and the fact that we used a Wiccan spell, she wanted to continue on with keeping the pregnancy as close to her faith as possible. So that meant avoiding the hospital. I was glad. We consulted with her old Wiccan group for advice and set up for the specialist in pregnancy, essentially a witch doctor, to live in with us once she became 6 months pregnant for further help and to help with her delivery. I took out the quad into the forest, setting up for hunting season. Hey, might as well. I'm on sick leave still. I stopped by at Frank's to let him know the good news. I got back late afternoon and Veronica was sleeping, so I loaded up some drinks and headed back over to plan our new tree stand spots. With my land, our hunting ground has expanded greatly. Veronica was doing well during the winter, growing every day. Thinking back, some odd things did happen. She started to frown upon my hunting and trapping, vanquishing all of my hunting paraphernalia to the shed. I just figured she was just preparing for the baby. She started banning meat from the house. It was making her sick even to smell. Seemed typical enough at the time, so I obliged. She seemed to have been growing larger by the day, but I wouldn't dare mention it. I value my life. Spring quickly arrived. We were setting up for the specialist to arrive when Veronica started to feel ill towards the evening and decided to lay down in the bed. I was nearly done setting up and the sun was going down. I gathered some pillows and sheets from the house, the finishing touches to the old sauna house we cleaned up to be sort of a granny flat for the witch doctor. I heard a loud scream and began hearing Veronica calling my name as if she was in agonizing pain. I dropped the sheets and pillows outside and ran into the bedroom. When I entered, she was naked on the bed. She was leaning forward on her knees, facing the headboard. Her forearms were clutched to her pillow, with her face smushed into the pillow as she attempted to bury it deeper and deeper, trying to muffle her blood-curdling screams. By this time, she had already lost so much blood. I was completely stunned. How was this happening? She was fine not too long ago, except for a little tired. I dashed back out to get the sheets I dropped to stop the bleeding. I pressed them against her body in a desperate attempt to contain all the blood she was losing. The bed was completely soaked. She kept screaming, but began fighting breathlessly to speak, only able to muster phrases like, "This isn't right. This can't be happening. I can't do this." Then all of a sudden, in an almost calm, soothing voice, she said, "I love you," and she let go of her fight. That was the last words I would ever hear from my darling Veronica. I'm not even sure if I said it back because at that very moment, a little bundle fell out into the sheets that I was holding against her body. Maybe that was her goodbye to the child she would never meet. On April 4th, 2015, I became a father. I placed the bundle down in the bassinet and grief-stricken stumbled towards my sweet Veronica. She was still, the sweat still making its way down her forehead when I turned her over. She had that grin on her face, the one I will never forget. She seemed at peace. I kissed her forehead and said my tearful goodbyes. Through my sobbing, I heard the bassinet fall over at the end of the bed. Panic swept over me. The bundle, still wrapped up in the once white sheets, appeared to grow taller and stumble, unhuman-like. I cautiously made my way over. I lifted the sheet off the tiny mass and saw bright white spots, hundreds of them, on top of a brown fur, long ears, and a small snout. My wife had given birth to a white-tailed deer. I fainted as it took its first steps. I awoke to the horror I'd left behind, blood-stained sheets, my dead wife with her head cocked towards me, eyes wide open, and commotion at the edge of the bed, being the newborn fawn, standing there confused, looking desperate for some milk. That's when the knocking at the door began. I shook myself awake. This must be some sort of lucid nightmare. Did I hit my head outside or something? If anything, whoever it is at the door will probably have some obscure answer and I will wake up, with everything being back to normal. I stumbled to the door. There stood a figure, not much older than I, with long, bright red dyed dreadlocks and a pale face, smaller than the average adult, but the fierceness in her eyes made up for her stature. "How's Veronica doing?" said the same voice I had heard numerous times on speakerphone calls my wife had made. "The witch doctor has arrived. She didn't make it," as I rubbed my head, cursing the woman silently for not coming sooner. "She asked me to come after the full moon, said you'd need my help." "What? But how? Why?" The room started to spin, and this time I felt the drop. Everything moved in slow motion as I hit the floor. I awoke again, and things were different this time. Veronica was gone from the bed, along with any trace of her existence. I heard the kettle boiling on the stove and a woman's stern voice. "Sit," is all she said, and I obliged. I was still lightheaded, but pretty sure this isn't a dream. I sat on the chair and stared at her, not knowing what to say. But looks like she will be doing most of the talking anyway. Veronica never mentioned the fainting thing to me. Thought I'd have a man for the heavy lifting part. "What did you do to her?" "Calm down. I did exactly as she asked." "What the fuck did she ask? What is going on? What the fuck was that thing?" "You're the hunter. You should know." "Why are you laughing? My wife is dead. What is happening?" She seemed deep in thought at this point, like wondering how to explain this to someone beneath her. How could I make this dummy understand? Was the look her eyes gave me as she spoke slowly. She told me her concerns, that she felt funny, like the spell may have gone wrong. Was your mind completely clear? Did you follow her exact instructions? I pondered. Fuck, was this my fault? I was thinking of a mystical creature man with antlers when I did the ritual. Did I somehow mess it up and create a deer instead of a human baby? No, I did what she said. I had to lie to save face. Don't lie, you're a hunter through and through. It wasn't your fault. All you knew beforehand was he was the Celtic god, until she hastily mentioned his other name. It painted a picture in your mind you couldn't shake. She knew you wanted to be a father wholeheartedly, but that your focus showed flickers of conflict, bouncing for two separate thoughts. The time was perfect. The full moon was at its peak, and she wanted to finish the spell. If it didn't work, she would ask you to try it again. She knew how much you wanted to be a father. She knew something was wrong and didn't stop it. She continued to let me do it even though she felt I wasn't doing the spell right. She just thought it would fail and she would get you to try it again. But it didn't, and now she's gone forever. But you have your son to look after now. Although sad, it is your obligation. A fawn? My son is a fucking fawn? Here, have some tea. She hands me a cup. I take a whiff. Should I trust her? Just drink it. It will clear your head. Can she read my thoughts? Impossible. I take a drink, and well, that answers that, as the world around me went blank. I slept for 72 hours straight. Who knows what she did to me during that time, what kind of voodoo the woman was swinging, but Veronica confided in her, so I had to trust her. Turned out she was right to bring her here for me. The witch doctor followed Veronica's instructions and stayed until I would be ready on my own. She took care of the fawn, and I was getting over my resentment towards the whole situation. I gradually came around, mostly because I wanted the thing out of my house. I built a 3-sided baby barn and stuffed it full of hay, surrounded it in a fence, and lined the inside with chicken wire. I added a trough for when he was old enough to eat solid food. Then the feelings of wanting to protect what's mine settled in. I had grown to seek his attention, and was more than happy to tend to this little creature's needs. By this time, he was no longer on the replacement milk, and was on solid foods that I had gathered from the forest. I decided to name him Cernan. When fall arrived, the witch doctor had told me I was ready for the responsibility now, and Veronica would be so proud no matter how unconventional it may seem. She left after reminding me that I am a father and he is a part of Veronica, holding true my only connection to her now. I said my goodbyes and thanked her for her patience. Now it was just us. Time went on and I could see his color changing. The spots have all but disappeared, and his coat is turning a grayish-brown color. Winter will soon be upon us. I gathered food, finished the last of the wood stock, and settled into the house for the night. That's when I heard a noise from outside, that all too familiar noise of, I live in the middle of nowhere. It was the sound of a bear clumsily moving around my backyard. Luckily for certain, I recently brought in my .22 from the shed for these occasions. I looked out of the back sliding glass door and saw the black bear pawing at the food trove through a gap in the fence, and around Cernan's shelter breaking the chicken wire. I glanced over. Cernan was no longer laying on the hay, and was approaching the noise, unafraid, not even backing off by the bear's growls to leave him with his newfound food. I turned on the porch light. That was my first warning. And now the bear has moved beyond the berries and grains and set its sight on a new food source, a little yearling. He began standing up. He was roughly 6 feet, 5 inches tall, weighing in around 500 pounds. I've seen larger, but still it could easily break down the enclosure. He put his weight against the side, and with one fell swoop his paw made contact with Cernan's right ear, leaving a gash from his claws. That's enough now. I approached it, making as much noise as possible, trying to draw attention to myself. My adrenaline was pumping. I pulled the trigger towards the forest instead of backing off. He starts to approach me, showing off his mass, perfect for me. With my second shot aimed at his lung, it was an instant kill. Cernan stayed inside the cabin for the rest of the night as I washed the blood off of my face and spent the rest of the night cleaning my new rug. The long winter was over, and the day commemorating when my life-shifted realities was here. It was once again April 4th. Respecting Veronica's belief of the moon cycle, I decided to set Cernan out into the forest on the next full moon, April 22nd. He was now ready to be on his own, to fend for himself. His coat had returned into his spring colors of reddish-brown. Still too young to grow antlers just yet. The gash from the black bear attack had gone infected and left a C shape out of his ear. I took down the fence and wire around the shelter without hesitation. He galloped into the tree line. In the moonlight, his white features almost seemed to glow before he disappeared into the forest. He stopped. We made eye contact, and he gave a simple nod of recognition that I returned. I always feel closest to Veronica during the full moon. Life always seems to move on regardless if I want it to. But time seemed to stand still when I stopped to appreciate the night under the full moonlight. I sat outside on Saturday night as I was watching the forest in the cool summer breeze, waiting for the moon to appear. I felt nostalgic. As all the pain I felt evaporated into the air, I realized however short-lived that whole part of my life was. It is just now that I realized that the happiest times in my life had been spent with Veronica, as well as Cernan. He was the part of herself that she left behind for me, and as tonight is described as full buck moon, I felt connected with him once again. I haven't seen him for over a year. I wonder how he has been, if he is still alive. I was drifting off into deep thought, wondering if he had survived all the problems facing him. Predators, disease, cars. That is, when he appeared in the woods minutes after midnight, his antlers fully grown and magnificent. He had grown into a fine buck. I studied his stature. He stood tall, with his white-rimmed eyes staring at me. His long white neck, blending down with a muscular physique, was covered with summer fur and the C-shaped chunk out of his ear. The finest of specimens I have ever laid my eyes upon. He did not approach me or move far from the tree line, and I found myself thanking the God for the blessing. It was then I noticed the forest had become silent, and the breeze ceased to exist. Until the minute was over, We gave our simple nods and off he went, flashing the white underside of his tail as he headed back to where he truly belonged. Until next year, maybe he will come back with my grandfonts and a doe-in-law. What a silly thought. I digress. Now seems like a perfect time for an impromptu hunting trip. I think I'll give Frank a call.